Hello, I'm author Nancy Flinchbaugh with Spiritual Seedlings Interviews. Today we are digging deeper into my novel Revelation in the Roots, Emerald Isle, to learn about the Celtic spiritual tradition in the story. We're very fortunate to have here Carl McColman, who is an author, a Christian contemplative, and a teacher of the Celtic spiritual tradition. Carl has written several books on the Celtic spirituality, and I've learned from him a lot on this subject at a retreat at my church, at an online class, and also from his books. If you've never met Carl, you're in for a treat. Today we'll be talking about Celtic spirituality. Welcome to the Spiritual Seedlings interview with Carl McColman today. Good morning, Carl. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Nancy?
I'm doing great. I am interviewing Carl today because he is an expert on Celtic spirituality. If you've read my book, Revelation in the Roots, Emerald Isle, you'll know that there's a little bit of the Celtic spirit in the book. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk to Carl a little bit and learn from him. And he has a lot more information that you can explore if you want to know more about Carl's work. But tell me a little bit, Carl, about your interest in Celtic spirituality. How did you become interested, and what things have you done as part of your Celtic journey?
Well, McColman is a Scottish name. And so, even as a boy, I remember, my family, my dad and my older brothers, talking about our tartan, and there was a Scottish shop. I grew up near Williamsburg, Virginia, and there was a Scottish shop in Williamsburg. I think it might even still be there. And we would go there and just kind of, look at all the books and the kilts and so forth. Nobody in my family ever wore a kilt. They all just talked about it. And so when I got married, I wore a kilt. So, I was the one who actually moved it from, talk to action. And so it's always been in my blood. I've always been interested in, I guess, the broader spirituality of the British Isles, not just Ireland and Scotland, but also Britain itself. Stonehenge. Everyone associates Stonehenge with the Druids, which is more myth than any necessarily historical fact, but that's always been of interest to me. And then I guess I was, in my 20s, when I came across a book on Celtic Christianity. And so that was kind of an interesting, that Celtic spirituality isn't just about Druids, that there's a Christian dimension to Celtic spirituality as well. And I read that particular book. I think the author was Christopher Bamford, and it just opened up for me the whole kind of world of the Celtic saints, of the writings of the Celtic saints, early Irish poetry, some of the mythology, some of the stories of the saints. And so it's just been an abiding interest of mine, ever since. And I've been very fortunate to have, been, of course, I'm based in North America. I've been to Scotland once, I've been to Ireland now 5 times. So every time I go there, it's just like, my soul gets filled up with the, with the land and the people and the history and the folklore and the myth. So there's just a lot there. One of the things I like to say is that Celtic Christianity is not a different type of Christianity, but it's like a different culture of Christianity. So it's still, kind of like, the basic teachings of the Christian faith are embraced by the Celtic tradition, but they're understood or maybe experienced in a different way. For example,
go ahead. Yeah, I was just wondering what's unique about that, and how would you characterize that Celtic spirituality just in general?
That's right where I was going. So it's a strong emphasis on the natural world, kind of this, especially in the poetry, you find this real kind of recognition that you meet God through nature, that you meet God through animals, you meet God through the elements. In fact, there was some literature that I can't remember if it's one particular author or maybe a number, but who would refer to God as the Lord of the elements, or Jesus as the Lord of the elements. So you have that really, again, kind of nature-based dimension. Celtic spirituality tends to be very mystical, a very strong sense of the presence of God. As a friend of mine who's from Belfast, he used to say on his blog, "God is not elsewhere," which is such a quintessentially Celtic approach to spirituality. God is not elsewhere. Here, God is, in our hearts, in our bodies, in our lives, in our world. And then the third thing I would say is that it is a spirituality of story and song and poetry. It's a very creative spirituality. There's this beautiful tradition of illuminated manuscripts, of metalwork, of stone carving, the high crosses. So, so there's this tremendous appreciation of the arts and using the arts to kind of celebrate what it means to be a spiritual person. So nature, mysticism, and creativity, I would say, are kind of three unique hallmarks of the Celtic path.
Okay, great. And so now I want to talk a little bit about sacred places in Ireland as well as thin places. Some of the sacred places in the book the novel that I wrote, include Newgrange and the monasteries, Clonmacnoise and Glengarry, as well as the Well of St. Bridget and the Solace Retreat Center in Hermitage. So have you been to any of those places, or do you have any comments on them?
Yeah, the only one I haven't been to is Glengarry. I've been to all the rest. And, I don't know how much detail you want, but Glendalough is, again, the kind of, to me, the quintessential thin space, the space where the sense of the divine presence is very strong. Of course, that's the site of St. Kevin and his monastery. It's just very, very beautiful in the middle of, where a glacier had gone through. And so you've got these two long glacier lakes. That's what Glendalough means, the glen of the two lakes, or the two lochs. And then the monastic settlement, there's a labyrinth there, an ancient labyrinth that was carved into a stone. So it's just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful place. And if anybody's familiar with the TV show Ballykiss Angel, it was filmed not far from Glendalough. So you have that kind of traditional Irish kind of culture there. Kildare, the home of St. Bridget, is a lovely town. It's just kind of like over the mountain or over the hill from Glendalough, not far, maybe 30 or 40 minutes by car. Just a lovely little small Irish town, but it is the home of the Brigidine sisters. It is the ancestral home of St. Bridget. There's still a beautiful castle there, an old medieval round tower, which when I was there, you could pay and actually climb your way up to the top of it. I don't know if it's still open or not. Maybe, it was closed during the pandemic. But, and you mentioned Bridget's Well. There are a lot of Bridget's Wells in Ireland, but the two that I'm the most, well, there are three that I'm really familiar with, two of which are in Kildare. So the third one is in County Clare on the west coast of Ireland. It's in Liscannor. It's a beautiful well associated with St. Bridget as well. But and Clonmacnoise, it's on the River Shannon. It's the home of St. Ciaran. Again, just this beautiful old monastic settlement, really lovely because you've got the river just, winding right by the edge of the monastic ruins, and, some really, really splendid high crosses, the carved high crosses that are so emblematic of the Celtic tradition. I don't know if I touched on all that. Did you mention Newgrange?
Yes.
Yeah. And of course, Newgrange is pre-Christian, so what we might think of as mythic or pagan, but it has really, it is an absolutely exquisite site. It was, I think, about 5,000 years old now, so even earlier than Stonehenge. It's a passage tomb. It's basically a cemetery, and they would cremate the remains of their dead and would actually bury them in these small chambers deep in the hill. The entire hill is human made, but it's got this beautiful kind of like stone edifice and these amazing stones all the way around it with the spiral carvings on them. Again, just this beautiful work of art. But its pièce de résistance is that it is oriented towards the winter solstice. I've never been in it on the winter solstice. It's very hard to get tickets to go into Newgrange on the winter solstice. They have a lottery. I usually enter the lottery every year. I've never won, but but I have one friend, she's passed away now, but one friend who did do it. And she said it was just absolutely exquisitely magical. When you go visit Newgrange today, they will actually use electric light to kind of simulate what you experience. But on the morning of the winter solstice, the sun shines directly down this shaft into the tomb area. And so it, number one, to think that these people 5,000 years ago had such a sophisticated understanding of astronomy and of mathematics that they were able to orient this tomb directly towards the sunrise on the winter solstice. That's just an engineering marvel in and of itself, a scientific marvel. But then the spirituality of that there was this kind of understanding that on the shortest day, the longest night of the year, there was something magnificent about the sunrise, and that sunrise shone into, the chambers where the honored dead, where their remains were kept. So, of course, they left no written record, so we can only interpret it using archaeology, but it speaks to a very strong understanding of, certainly, of life after death, whether they were reincarnationists or whether they just believed in kind of a paradise. Again, we don't know, people have speculated, but it certainly does show this real sense of orientation towards the cosmos, which again, I think contributes to when Christianity came, 3,000 years later, that deep nature orientation that is part of the Celtic Christian tradition.
So this idea of thin space, you touched a little bit on that, I think, when you were talking about Glendalough, and my characters do go there too, and the lakes, they talk about the lakes being almost mystical the way they look. But what's a thin space, and what would you say are some of those thin places for you in Ireland?
Well, I think all that we've just talked about certainly qualify. Places, well, first of all, to define a thin space or a thin place, it's the idea that the veil separating the worlds is thin. So the veil separating earthly existence from heaven, or from paradise. The Celtic word for paradise is Tír na nÓg, the land of the youth. And so the idea, again, is that the worlds are interwoven. Think about the Celtic knot. There's this kind of interwoven quality between earthly and heavenly existence. But normally, we're not conscious of that. It's kind of like there's a veil that separates earth and heaven. But in the thin places, the veil is thin. So it's still there, but it's like it's more diaphanous. You can kind of like peek through it. And so there is just this intuitive way of recognizing that there are certain places that, to use your own words, that have a mystical feel to them, that have this sense of kind of hidden reality or hidden kind of transcendent presence. It's easier to touch the face of God, is another way to put it. Many churches, many religious sites qualify as thin places. Here in North America, there are monasteries, retreat centers that I have certainly had that sense of connection with the divine. But I also think places of natural beauty really qualify. And of course, Ireland and Scotland are replete with that. If you go to Scotland, if you go to the island of Iona, in the Hebrides, which is the historical home of St. Columba, the whole island is a thin place. You just feel like you're just one stop away from paradise. And and it's still Scotland. It's still very rugged. The elements are strong there. I've only been in the summer. I can only imagine what it's like in the winter when the days are really, really short. But still, there's just that sense of spiritual history, and that sense that God is just palpably present. In Ireland, we've already mentioned, the Newgrange, there's the Hill of Tara, which of course is associated with the ancestral kings. It's more mythology than history, but still it has that kind of romantic association. The Cliffs of Moher on the West Coast, these majestic cliffs, I think they're like 700 feet high, with the Atlantic Ocean just crashing against them. So all, and I'll tell you one part of Ireland I haven't been to. Hopefully the next time I go, which is we're planned for the summer of 2023. I'm planning on leading a pilgrimage, but I hope to get to the Dingle Peninsula and to the Ring of Kerry, which is, what I've heard from friends who've been there, is some of the most beautiful landscape. Although Ireland is replete with beautiful landscapes, so almost anywhere you go, you're going to touch that natural beauty.
They do visit the Cliffs of Moher in my book, and to the Dingle Peninsula. When Steve and I went down there, and I got to play my fiddle in a pub. So there's a big circle in the book.
What fun. Yeah.
So Saint Bridget was an important part of Irish spirituality, and she appears as a spirit in my book. She kind of haunts some of the characters, and then they learn about her when they go to the retreat center, they visit the well. And so tell us a little bit about Saint Bridget and the role she played.
Well, it's funny because right above my computer screen on the opposite wall, I have 3 icons hanging, and I call them my 3 graces. And they're Julian of Norwich, Teresa of Avila, and Bridget of Ireland. And those are like the 3 women saints who mean the most to me. So Bridget is in a very exclusive club in my world. And I've never been to Avila. I've never been to St. Teresa's home. I've been to Norwich and I've been to Kildare. So Avila is on my bucket list. But when you write a book about Spain, we'll have to talk about that. But Bridget, she's really she's the earliest of those 3. Bridget dates back, she's like a generation after St. Patrick. So late 5th, early 6th century, that's what we think of as the Dark Ages, the early medieval period. Our history is very sketchy. Really, there's more folklore than history. But the story is that she was the daughter of a pagan chieftain who owned slaves, and he had this Christian slave woman who he got pregnant. She gives birth to Bridget. She is born, the mother worked in the dairy. And so Bridget is born on the morning of February 1st, right at sunrise, as her mother is stepping into the dairy. So she's got 1 foot outside and 1 foot inside, and the baby just pops right out. And so the myth here is you've got this woman who is, at least in birth, is neither slave nor free, neither pagan nor Christian, born neither at night nor at day, neither indoors nor outdoors, neither in the winter nor in the summer, because February 1st was the beginning of spring in the Celtic calendar, and spring was considered a summer season. So she's this in-between figure. She's this liminal figure, which is just a fancy word to mean a figure of the threshold, a figure of the in-between spaces. And so that's part of her sacredness. And so she does grow up to embrace the Christian faith, the faith of her mother. She eventually becomes a nun. There are all sorts of amazing, legendary stories about her. She had a cow that would never dry up, that the milk just flowed in abundance. She used her mantle. A chieftain, she asked a chieftain for land for her convent, and he said, well, as much land as your mantle would cover. And so she spun her mantle, and it grew and grew and grew until it covered 600 acres. And that land is now just outside of Kildare. It's called the Curragh, and it's associated with horse racing now. The national stud, the national horse racing farm, is right there at the Curragh. So it's a neat connection. Of course, she's associated with spring. Again, her feast day is February 1st. She's associated with peacemaking. And as you know, Nancy, I also have a great interest in pre-Christian Celtic spirituality, the pagan Celts. There was a pagan goddess named Bridget. And so a lot of the folklore about, Bridget the goddess and Bridget the saint, they kind of wash into each other, which I find fascinating. And I think it really speaks again to kind of this integral nature of Celtic spirituality in general, but including Celtic Christianity, that the pre-Christian is not seen as something evil or bad, something that you have to reject, but it's just part of the history, it's part of the story. And that and so like many of the holy wells, I know we briefly touched on holy wells, they were probably sacred to the old pagan gods. And then Christianity came along, and they just made them sacred to the saints. And so they're the ancient sites of veneration and prayer and worship that Christianity did not renounce, did not reject, but really kind of embraced. and said, okay, well, now that, we're a Christian people, we'll continue to pray here. But of course, now we're going to pray to the Christian saints. So there's kind of like this continuity that I think is really beautiful.
Okay. Well, I know you've written a lot of books, Carl, and I know I have two of them here on Celtic spirituality. One was 366 Celt, a year and a day of Celtic wisdom and lore. And the other one is more recent, an invitation to Celtic wisdom, a little guide to mystery, spirit, and compassion. Can you tell us a little bit about these books and what?
Sure. And it's a great segue after what I was just talking about, because 366 Celt was originally it was published by Thorson's, which is an imprint of HarperCollins, and the editor specifically wanted a book that would embrace both the pagan and the Christian. So when you read that book, you'll find I do talk about the old gods and goddesses and the old mythology and that kind of thing, but I also talk about the saints. So it's a very kind of comprehensive invitation into Celtic spirituality. As the title suggests, it's a book of daily meditations. So that's kind of how that book is organized. And then that same editor, he and I worked together for many years. I think we did 5 or 6 books. About 5 years later, he said, as much as that I love that book, I would like you to kind of revise it and make it more specifically for a Christian readership. So he was thinking like John O'Donohue and John Philip Newell and those kinds of guys. I don't deserve to be in the same breath as those guys, but that's what we did. So some of the material that's in 366 Celt does kind of track over to an invitation to Celtic wisdom, but there's a lot of new material too. But it is more specifically about Celtic Christianity and looking at the Christian dimension of the Celtic tradition. So depending on your interest, I mean, if you're primarily interested in the Christian tradition, an invitation to Celtic wisdom is probably the book to get. If you have that more kind of broad interest, you probably really enjoy the 366 Celt.
Okay, well, this has been wonderful, Carl. Is there anything else you'd like to add or share about your Celtic?
Well, I already mentioned, that I am currently in conversation with a small community here in Atlanta to put together a trip to Ireland. I did a pilgrimage to Scotland the year before the pandemic, and it was just a wonderful experience. So we're going to go to Ireland in 2023. If people are interested, the best thing to do is to get onto my email list, which you can do from my website. My website does have a Gaelic name. It's anamcara.com. So that's ANAMCHARA.com. And it's the Gaelic word that means soul friend, which of course is a traditional image for spiritual direction. So.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And I'll give you a little more information about how you can contact Carl and his work. So have a great day.
Thanks, Nancy.
Here are the 3 books that Carl mentioned during the interview. An Invitation to Celtic Wisdom, A Little Guide to Mystery, Spirit, and Compassion, which was published in 2018. The Spirit of Celtic Gods and Goddesses, Their History, Magical Power, and Healing Energies, which is primarily about the pre-Christian Celtic traditions, which was republished from an earlier version just in 2020. And finally, 366 Celt, A Year and a Day of Celtic Wisdom and Lore, which includes daily devotionals and incorporates both the Christian and pre-Christian Celtic tradition. You can read more about Carl on his website at anamcara.com. There you can sign up to receive emails of his blog, request him to book an event, find out what events he has planned, contact him about spiritual direction, and also an opportunity to become his Patreon. As he mentioned, he will be leading a pilgrimage to Ireland in 2023, so check back to his website for more information, which will be posted there once the details are finalized. You can also find Carl on YouTube. You can find an interview that I conducted with him on meditation when I was exploring contemplative practices after writing my book on contemplative practices. Also, there's a playlist that Carl has on his own YouTube channel, Celtic Spirituality, and there you can find a 4-part series, 1 hour each program, on more depth in Celtic spirituality. This has been a Spiritual Seedlings interview with Nancy Flinchbaugh. Find out more about my novel, Revelation, the Roots, Emerald Isle, and my other books at spiritualseedlings.com and nancyflinchbaugh.com.